didn't know where to start, so I looked at the beginning of aviation. Plenty for everybody to find online, wherever you're from, whatever your country. It starts someplace in your history where there is enough disclosure for you to start running the story. I put right at the top of the slide that this German industrial designer that I know and worked with for many years was describing to me the wild races that happened around these small towns in Germany, and they were killer races. I mean, people died, things exploded, and they weren't just looking at petroleum. There probably wasn't anything that they didn't try, and this, he said, had been going on for many, many years as a child in Germany, but many years before that. So I don't want to make any assumption that this is the beginning of flight, this aviation meet in Los Angeles. What I do want to say is something that I mentioned at our table last night, that California is kind of the world headquarters of creating illusions. So the illusion is right there in the poster. They were pre-programming you for flight with internal combustion engines, with the size of the aerospace machine that was up there. Because if you look at the actual photographs from the aviation meet, there was a few of them, but even the photographs are very manipulated. I'll show you one. But I was just trying to follow, you know, a beginning where we were selling the illusion of petroleum and downplaying everything else. So I saw that as very deliberate. So we've got the Smithsonian and all of our different institutions have the very beginnings of the Wright engine. There's even a Wright Award for FAA officials. And I was able to ask someone who's very involved with that, why did they choose Wright as the name of an award for people in the FAA when, you know, the FAA wasn't even around? He goes, well, it's just what they, you know, just what they thought of. He actually didn't have an answer, but you can tell I'm thinking in those, you know, we've just got this culture of this is where aviation began. So what I'm showing here at the bottom is the innocence of the people who, I was trying to pull some actual documents from the Trumble collection to show you, you know, dear sister, this young man who ended up being, well, she married M.J. Trumble, but he was just writing her saying, well, I got some postcards and I didn't have to pay for them, so I sent them to you. And that's kind of the level of innocence you had between the workers, and even he was working on refinery designs in Coalinga before M.J. Trumble, the man on the right, started building the first refineries. So I'm showing you the 1900 California oil production. Again, all these numbers regarding volume will vary depending on the source that you choose. You as the author of any kind of aviation petroleum history, I'm certainly no expert, needs to choose your sources for your own country, your own place. And then I'm just showing a comparison between 1900 and 1914, which was huge, especially with regard to California. Oops, sorry, I jumped ahead. So I just took the Wikipedia definition of internal combustion engines. I'm showing you, this would be like I would do to a third grade and tell them, go on Wikipedia, which is not my greatest source. I usually avoid that. But for some things like this, the school teacher has you go there, right? And so I'm saying the internal combustion engine, you can read anything about it and see an example, such as we saw at Cool Springs Power Museum, a 1910 one-cylinder gas engine, all the way up to rockets. We're jumping through a lot of technology to even open the door to this subject. And then here out of the Wikipedia explanation, I'm saying the second class of internal combustion engines, as opposed to external combustion, is that continuous combustion used in gas turbines, jet engines, and most rocket engines. So that gets you in the door between the earliest parts of the engine and then the kind of rockets being made now. And then once again, to indoctrinate or get you into the history of it, I tried to go around the world in terms of aviation and put it all on one slide. So this is like craziness. But there's a very famous Russian photo, and I was looking for the first country in the world to strap bombs on their planes too. Okay, to have to develop the kind of iron and combustion power and muscle to carry the heavier and heavier loads. in the poster about the mail. The mail was obviously a non-combatant type of load that it made designers have to increase the size and the power of engines. So when you look at the world, you see the Germans doing the really heavy, that's the middle photo there, really heavy thing. And Igor Sikorsky caught my attention because he was ganging together tractor engines.
There's a pointer on.
Oh, okay.
2 points.
Now I've got to wave my arms.
Please use one of them.
Okay. Igor Sikorsky, because he goes through history, tracks through the history of aviation, petroleum, and fuel system design, and the size of airplanes and engines. He was such a favorite of the United States, but he was starting to gang together tractor engines in his earliest aviation designs in Russia before he came to America in 1919. And then I was trying to represent some of the Asian background here, and I just happened to get invited to go to the Plains of Fame Air Show in Chino, California, just a couple weeks ago. And there's a whole contingency there that is restoring the kamikaze planes. So this one is the only one I think that has the original engine. It's quite a work of art and love when you see what these aviators are putting together. Again, California sits on the cutting edge of this type of passionate pursuit of leading the world from feeling sorry for the kamikaze pilots to actually celebrating their designs and what they were able to do with working with so little in their point of origin. And then of course the Flying Tigers is a huge part of our American history and our connection to China. Okay, so very quickly here, the only way to no fuel is to burn it. Being that I am an environmentalist, deserts are great for testing any kind of chemistry and aircraft and fuel. And then I put this blog post from someone named Edward about watching this particular air show. I haven't seen the F-22 in action myself at an air show, but there's plenty of videos online. Everything I'm showing you pretty much can be accessed online. I shot this video at the air show, and I'm just calling that a basic red prop performing plane, okay? Later in the show I'll show you a little bit more about it. But that's so custom, you can't even say that that's actually a vintage aircraft. So going between that and the jet and fuel would be a way to introduce it to people as not an ugly thing that is going to destroy the world, but there's actually the seeds of our beginning of getting our act together a little bit more as a planet. Jumping back through the time tunnel to a couple of important highlights for the United States, but any country that you're from, you could pull, what were your first time doing this, your first time doing that. So the first is really a very important concept for every region, for every country, and for the planet. We don't know. We actually don't have a lot of what the firsts are for the planet, but we can kind of check the history in our region to say that was a really important thing. This was important for civilian applications as well as military. And the Navy was always the most resistant to these kinds of crazy things that might cost them their honor in terms of the public. So this guy is just a private little flyer. And at first they have him risk his life, and then they take on, the whole aircraft carrier concept. And these first flyers, online you can, and this is where I'm kind of getting into a little bit of a copyright issue of using actual YouTube videos, but I wanted to make it so any of you can go online if you get any kind of interest in this and actually watch some of those videos and pull the first from your country if it's in a library or an archive, a private source, as well as any public source all the way up to the UN, which is where I get some information too. And you can start to put the story together very simply, pulling a couple of the highlights. So the first air refuel is a very, very important step. And then Eddie Rickenbacker is just such a character. I mean, there isn't a picture of him that doesn't show the character of the pilot. bringing it back into fuel or petroleum history, essentially. The original documents that show the continuous refining process for the Trumble process. This document is dated 1904-05, and then the patent was registered, I think, it was registered in 05 and granted in 1909. And we'll see where it goes as far as ever getting into the Inventors Hall of Fame or whatever places that might want to acknowledge it. So far, nothing. Crickets. All I'm getting is crickets. Anywhere I try to, promote this or get it acknowledged in really any place other than here at the Petroleum History Institute. Okay, so one of the things that really hit me as far as the internal combustion engine having a relationship to continuous refining was the sound of the engine. This is going to sound crazy, but intermittent refining was the earliest refineries, but getting that process to go continual, right, and then increase the speed and increase the volume, that was always the goal. And so I think of driving down Las Vegas Boulevard in my friend's '68 Charger, and the way the engine sounds. It had people just running off the sidewalks going, "We love it, we love it." And the engine just goes, dum, 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 and then it just increases its speed. And that really is the intermittent power that you wanted in an engine, and you wanted that in refining as well. So then we get into the pioneers out in the west, the far west, the coastal area, that got that first pipeline going. And all the gentlemen that were doing that, they were perfect gentlemen, but they were also like, don't get in my way, get off my lawn type guys. And you can kind of read the slide, they kind of walks you through it, by itself. But a lot of these people that came into the General Petroleum family were from back east, and a lot of them were from the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia area. So that was, they brought manpower, brains, and equipment from back east out to the very western coast of the United States. Look, what did I do? Okay. I've shown this slide before, California before 1914. These maps are really important. I don't think they're ever shown in any of the public schools because there's simply a complete absence of this kind of information that the kids ever get. So no matter where they've immigrated from into California, they just have no sense of where anything fits together, okay? I think that's kind of sad, and so they really pay attention when they see stuff like this, because these are almost like forbidden documents to them. They couldn't give it in a report in school, because it doesn't follow the curriculum of how they're supposed to be learning. So I have 3 source documents on John Barneson, Captain John Barneson, who was the head of General Petroleum, but I'm showing you the other couple of companies in California, Union Oil Petroleum Company being one of the specific ones, that has great characters, great people, and you can get their genealogy information and all their early beginnings. This is an actual document that shows who was involved in putting together Trumble Refining Company. Father and son teams were very, very big. There are people at the aviation meet who are on this list here. And this comes from the Trumble family themselves. And I wanted to also, in addition to the array of images here that shows you what was coming into play, is to give you that refining capacity benchmark. Because when you had 20,000 barrels a day coming out of California in 1913, that's called raising the bar very high for the rest of the country to follow. It's like, oh, okay, investors are gonna flow and flood, whether you're a Rothschild or a Rockefeller. That caught their attention because that kind of volume meant quite a bit of revenue. So it was all in the refining. And this was an article I came across online very recently. So there's lots of stuff constantly coming online. The Daily Breeze article, never heard of the Daily Breeze, was posted in 2014. Captain John Barneson brings an oil refinery to Torrance. And this is really one of these articles that makes it so baseline that the article doesn't even make sense, but the people reading it don't know the difference. And it's kind of like the story of the biggest refinery there in Torrance. But once I got into looking at the history of it, and I cracked back into the Trumble documents and pulled out this high-octane declared U.S. secret weapon, which was much more accurate history, and that's what I put on the poster. You see that because I didn't know that the Vernon refinery that I had pictures of from 1913, that the guts of that refinery was actually moved into Torrance to start the biggest ExxonMobil refinery. Now, I'm not saying I know what parts of it, but the article definitely says, you know, it shows you, I pulled out 3 points from the article, which is in the white, which you can read for yourself, and you can also pull it up online. So that's like your benchmark, you know, how big was a refinery that you had to get to do the aviation fuel at the level needed to make it cost effective to be part of the war machine, which is really what this refinery became, part of the war machine, very much so. And then I mentioned Igor Sikorsky there because the more engines, the more power, the more aviation fuel. Now, the California Energy Commission today has online, you know, all the refineries that are left in California, and I pulled the ones that began operations 1905 or 1907 to 1923. However, there is quite a bit of information that I do have and that you can cull from other sources if you were interested, to all the numerous independent smaller refineries that were then bought out or shuttered for one reason or another, or simply blown up. So I use the term hydrocarbon crafters in my abstract for this presentation. And I like that because I did see the crafting that was going on in the early stages when both Trumble, he's standing as Atlas Refinery there in Los Angeles in 1908, and then over there in Fellows, California, which is in the Kern County area, that was kind of the size of what these refineries were, but they were very powerful, compact refineries. One of the gentlemen who was actually a baby when M.J. Trumble lay dying in 1931, and he very tentatively came up to me. It's because he runs a metals company that does all space metals or spacecraft of every kind. Anyway, he gave me the picture above and that one that showed the kind of refining they were doing in the backyard of his uncle's house. So, you know, it was very low key, but you can see that the gentleman on the underside there looks to me to be Asian. I could be very wrong, but I'm just saying, I knew there was collaboration going on with Japan before, you know, it was prohibited. And these are 3 of the patents that I wanted to just highlight that show how early M.J. Trumble was, and there are many other people like M.J. Trumble were getting into modifying the internal combustion engine and getting into higher and higher octanes, or as Dr. Rice put it, pushing the octane. Yeah, I thought that was really good. Pushing the octane. And in my abstract, I also mentioned the white oil in Newhall, California. The fruit name, oh, he's gone already, last presenter. He mentioned the Frew name in the Dakota area, but that Frew family is very active in the Newhall oil history. So that's Newhall in the upper right, and this is Olinda, which is North Orange County, and there's an area that Shell, I don't know how much of their holdings they still have or have sold off, very active from the earliest days, still an active oil field in North Orange County called Carbon Canyon. And I wanted to show you an example of the blowout preventer and the safety under extreme pressure that these developers in this canyon came up with, because the Oil Museum in Brea is starting to gather together a lot of these safety devices that were used, and they've got quite a collection going, and that's kind of what's of interest other than misspelling safety there, that I am seeing develop at that particular little oil museum. And there's a whole lot of public interest. In an afternoon, they will tour and present to as many as 600 school kids. 600, that's a lot of children to even manage. But when I talk about California and any of this oil history stuff, I'm talking about numbers that you just cannot comprehend for this topic, that they're ready to receive. So, I mean, yeah, 5 minutes more? Okay. This gets you over to Wyoming and Colorado, the process being cyclical in character. Again, this was a refinery that Trumble built, 1927. I'm jumping over to Trinidad to show you the memories of this man here. And then, wait a minute, I jumped quite a few slides ahead. Okay, so Trinidad and Japan are two other areas where I've come across information in the Trumble documents that show me work that was going on in the 1920s. And this is in the book that I wrote about Trumble. Very, very baseline history. I don't have a lot of documentation. I don't have a lot of history, but I pulled what I could from United Nations documents and other documents that military people have put online. And this is our collective defense mentality in our museums today, specifically our air museums, where we go one, we go all, is really a derivation of where we went one, we went all. And so it derives from Article 5 of NATO. But it had its origins in World War II with the Allies. And that's what's being taught today. There's no petroleum history. There's a complete absence of a lot of different history that we're not getting. This is that picture of the beach, just to show you that a lot of the beach was open and usable by the public. This was the aerospace aviation culture that I actually come from. My dad worked for Aerojet. And the orange groves of California gave way to these highly technical businesses. So this shows you kind of how the landscape changed and how much there is to aviation petroleum heritage when you start to talk about 20th century carbon flight fuel beginnings. Okay, there's lots of different kinds of flight, but carbon fuel flight, I'm not calling it hydrocarbon for the old times, we call it hydrocarbons now. And then showing that these test pilots and these ACE pilots were so ingenious and so integral to the process of creating fuel systems and as well as guidance systems. And their admonition to us today would be, you had better get this right, people. So that's kind of like marching orders. Get it right, get the history right, and you'll get the future right. So this is where the future's going. Hydrocarbon performers, okay? So this is an extended family member who's a Top Gun pilot, as well as he waited 30 years to get onto the Lima Lima flight team. That's a 6-man flight team out of well, it's not really out of California. It started in the Midwest, Indiana. And then the southern part of the United States has Aeroshell. And that was the show that I went to. This guy does not use technology for his fuel gauge. He only uses that tube with the notches on it. And he does outrageous stuff. I'm showing you that you can see it online if you want to see this kind of performing online. This is what people are doing now. This is testing the outer limits, the outer envelopes. This was an article I wrote about a Palm Springs air show. My niece, who's 21, flew in the back seat of this. You can buy a back seat flight on a Stearman now, or all these different things. So the pilots and then people like us who are unafraid of the history are actually diving into the history and not waiting for authorization from the state or whoever thinks they're going to permit us to tell the history a certain way. I'm just saying we're going there. So we have the drones now doing a lot of photography and showing us here's a formerly contaminated site, and here's how the remediation is going. There's so much reporting going on. I mean, I just don't think people are even waiting for real estate prices or public agencies to tell them, you can do this. They're just not waiting. I mean, that's just the attitude that I'm living in, that I see. This is my last slide, which says, this is kind of like my credo. I showed this in Yorba Linda, and this to me reflects what we're doing, what our sources are. We're trying to nail it as best we can with the information we can get to, and it's no more glamorous than standing in a doorway in Casper, or I don't know, was that Casper, or this was at the Sinclair.
That was
Casper, yeah. I mean, it's not glamorous, this is just what we do. So that's it.
We could turn the lights back on now. Ann will say a few words about her posters over there before we take our break.
So we did cover a lot of this. None of my even tackling this topic would have happened without my knowing the wife of, she's married to the son of this aviator who is little known. I mean, I've even checked between the military branches. Did you ever hear of this guy? And there's so much controversy surrounding him, although he's one of the most highly decorated aces in the United States. And to hear firsthand how similar the story of their family is to the story of the Trumble family. It's just unbelievably similar. So what is nice is that I got a chance to kind of work with his history, and I'll say, I didn't know that such an article had been written that talked about on a wing and a prayer, and I had put that on this poster because that was part of the culture that I thought we were working with in terms of aviation history, aviation petroleum history, was the kind of media that's been given to us. I often say I wasn't educated in California, I was brainwashed in California, so I am your MK Ultra result. But that's okay, because you can find your way out of it through a lot of knowledge and a lot of teaching, and to come up with some very interesting angles on history. And that's what I'm trying to show in both histories. This is non-war centric, and this leads me to the conclusion that even if there had never been world wars, we would have been crazy enough to probably be the first, if not among the first, to do a transcontinental overnight mail service from one end of the country to the other. So I'm saying that the whole petroleum issue and aviation issue doesn't hinge on war. It hinges on that ego, that we must conquer type thing, and that's what in both posters I'm trying to show. So you can read them for yourselves. Any questions? Okay.
Incredible photographs. And
yeah, they're inspiring.